Um, Good morning, everyone. Today, Jimmy, Luka, Sue, and I are here as part of our global policy project with Maytree, a Toronto-based organization that works to advance human rights and reduce poverty in Canada. Our task was to examine how Canada implements its international human rights commitments. And today we are here to tell you how Canada can strengthen its implementation, reporting, and follow-up processes. Canada is often seen and sees itself as a human rights leader. But when we look beyond public commitments and focus on the systems meant to turn these promises into reality, we find serious gaps. Here is what we'll cover today: the current system, why it's falling short, and what can be done to fix it. This presentation isn't about evaluating Canada's performance on specific human rights issues. It's about the systems that support implementation, reporting, and follow-up. In other words, we're looking at the institutional architecture behind Canada's human rights commitments, because strong human rights performance only improves through better reporting, implementation, and structural reform. Talking about Canada on the world stage, Canada is a party to all 9 core UN human rights treaties and has ratified 7 of them. It actively participates in the Universal Periodic Review and treaty body reviews. It positions itself globally as a human rights champion. That reputation sets high expectations. But there's a disconnect between Canada's global image and how well it follows through at home. So why now? This is a critical moment. Globally, we are seeing democratic backsliding and open defiance of human rights institutions. Canada's credibility is at stake. Other countries are building formal national mechanisms to manage their international obligations. We risk falling behind. At the same time, the number and complexity of UN recommendations are growing. Canada's current systems aren't equipped to deal with this. This isn't just a performance issue, it's a structural one, which leads to what we call the implementation gap. Despite strong international commitments, Canada lacks a permanent mechanism to coordinate, implement, and track human rights obligations. What we found is a system that's fragmented, ad hoc, and reactive, more rhetoric than results. That has real consequences for accountability and for the people these rights are meant to protect. So how did we investigate this gap? To understand why the gap persists, we took a two-part approach. We reviewed official documents, from UN reports to internal frameworks and civil society submissions. We also conducted over 25 interviews with officials, members of parliament, civil society leaders, and international experts. These interviews revealed barriers, workarounds, and opportunities that policy documents often miss. Now, Sue will introduce how other countries are tackling these challenges through formal national mechanisms known as NMOFs and what lessons they offer for Canada.
Thank you, Nishtha. So building on the earlier point about the implementation gap, it's become clear that the more structured approach is needed, and that's where NMOF comes in. NMOFs mean national mechanisms for implementation, reporting, and follow-up. So what are they? What are NMOF? They are the permanent structured government bodies that are designed to systematically manage a country's international human rights commitments. They exist to address the implementation gap. Many countries agree human rights recommendations, but they often struggle put them into action domestically. So NMOF helps this by creating a permanent and coordinated government body that are dedicated to managing international human rights obligations. Because they are permanent bodies, they often address the challenges with the fragmented responsibility and ad hoc approaches within governments. They do so by establishing a clear mandate to handle international human rights obligations. It makes the process more systematic and accountable. There are 4 key elements that make NMOF effective. First, they need a formal mandate and institutional permanence. This is important because being established by law or executive decision gives NMOF authority to coordinate across different levels of government. Second, robust intergovernmental coordination is key, especially in federal systems like Canada. With the responsibility dispersed across government levels, we need clear structures like focal points, joint meetings, regular meetings, joint planning to ensure consistent follow-up throughout the process. And third, stakeholder engagement must be inclusive and structured. Civil society organizations, judiciary, parliament, national human rights institutions, and all affected communities must have the opportunity to participate meaningfully. And finally, good information systems matter. Digital tools are essential for tracking the recommendations and assigning responsibilities and making data public, all of which enhance transparency and accountability. Now I'd like to move on to our findings of our research. One of our key findings is the weak coordination across the different government departments. And first, there is an issue with the fragmentation and lack of ownership in Canada's current framework. This is because we have multiple governments, such as Canadian Heritage, Justice Department, Global Affairs Canada, and Canadian Human Rights Commission. They all work for the human rights work, but none of the single entity has the authority to lead or enforce implementation. Canadian Heritage plays a coordination role and primarily focused on stakeholder engagement and reporting, but it's not legally backed and has no enforcement power. So one of the civil society representatives noted that situation that no one and everyone is responsible, meaning the responsibilities are dispersed and there is no single entity that is truly accountable for implementation. So without centralized leadership and clear authority, the structure falls short of meeting international expectations and limits progress on human rights work. Second, Canada's federalism further complicates the implementation process. Federal government signs and ratifies treaties and is accountable to the UN bodies, but key areas such as housing rights, education, and healthcare, they are all under control of provincial and territorial governments. And provinces are not legally required to implement these treaties unless they pass their own laws. So it's pretty much voluntary on their part. And so the result is an uneven landscape where some provinces adopt progressive human rights policies while others disengage entirely. So one interviewee noted that the jurisdictions is often used as an excuse not to act. That means lack of political will among the actors rather than the constitutional barriers. Although there are some intergovernmental forums, forums that are working on human rights, they are purely advisory and non-binding, so leaving no clear path towards accountability. Now I'll pass it on to Jimmy to continue with the rest of the findings.
Thank you, Sue. So for our next finding, we're looking at Canada's human rights system and how it treats its community partners by pushing it into arm's length. It's important because we're looking at opaque bureaucratic processes and tokenistic engagement. Now, strategies do exist on paper, but in operation, it's behind closed doors. So we don't know if it's evaluated or not. Importantly, there is no central or public system for assessing human rights implementation. You know, Canadian Heritage is working on it, but that's all I said. Now, I point to you that picture right there. It reads that on the title, Taking Action Together. Guess what? That's not a human rights reporting. That's for SDG reporting. That reporting is written for you and I. In contrast, international human rights reporting is written to the UN. So that is a key difference here. Now, this key difference is an engagement challenge because it's tailored to the deadlines of reporting cycles. As one civil society interview has said, you know, they engage in human rights implementation every day, but they get invited to these meetings where it goes nowhere and they find it very insulting. Now that means engagement is kind of like a checkbox, symbolic, but not meaningful. Next, I would like to point you to our final findings on entrenched systemic barriers that block progress. Now, governments like to talk about human rights. We hear housing rights and such, but they do not like to take accountability. So for the key reasons here, chronic underfunding, low human rights literacy, and low political will. In short, they don't want to be sued or be held liable. Now, if we point to where this human rights program is located within Canadian heritage, it's actually under diversity and inclusion branch. That kind of shows how human rights is a low priority and a sentiment. Importantly, when we look at the targets they gave out to their own program, the first one is on how human rights website visits exceeded target by around 500,000 people. The next target, that was not met, is human rights publication failed to meet the target in less than half of what they set out. The story here is that more and more Canadians are really looking for human rights information, but they're not even publishing enough. And moreover, what kind of indicators are those? We're trying to evaluate the effectiveness of a human rights program. Strong commitments fall flat under these conditions. Now for findings, I'll pass it to Luka to share the recommendations. Thank you.
Great. So thank you, Jimmy. Our recommendations are focused on two primary things. First is structure and the other is data tracking. Each recommendation is grounded in the findings from our interviews, as well as in international best practices, to which we would be happy to discuss and take questions on in the question period. So our first recommendation is around structure and coordination. Canada requires a dedicated, permanent, and legally mandated NMRF to address the current fragmentation and inconsistent application of human rights across the country. Critically, this NMRF must also include formal mechanisms for federal, provincial, and territorial coordination to overcome federalism barriers, alongside ongoing stakeholder engagement to ensure legitimacy and effectiveness. Creating a cohesive, legally empowered, and participatory NMRF, one that has a particular mandate for implementation, is the foundational step towards building an accountable and effective framework for the implementation of international human rights in Canada. Our second recommendation is around meaningful engagement. Our findings showed that the government engagement process is currently front-loaded around reporting, with little occurring later on for progress or implementation. The government should formalize engagement spaces and processes throughout the entirety of the international human rights reporting cycle, including, importantly, for implementation. Beyond establishing these spaces, the type of engagement is also important. Our findings revealed that current engagement tends to come in the form of large, unfocused meetings, which tend to be inefficient. To address this, engagement tables based on topics or themes should be created to bring in a more focused discussion with all the relevant stakeholders on a particular topic. Our third recommendation, open the doors, transparency, and tracking. Our findings revealed that there's a broad sentiment among civil society representatives that processes and data related to human rights in Canada are opaque. To address this, the government should publicize agendas and outcomes and implement a centralized human rights tracking database, such as the United Nations National Recommendations Tracking Database that the Canadian government is currently piloting. For this database to be a success, we desperately need indicators and data related to human rights in Canada. This means that someone has to be responsible for dealing with these human rights data and for updating it onto the platform. This responsibility could be given to a new government body. It could be added to the mandate of a current institution dealing with human rights, perhaps Canadian Heritage with more resources, or it could be the responsibility could be contracted out to a body such as Statistics Canada, making them an important stakeholder in the platform. Lastly, and of paramount importance for the database, it needs to be open and accessible for relevant stakeholders. This importantly means that civil society organizations working on human rights related topics need to be able to access and participate on the platform. So moving forward, 3 keys to bridging the gap. The first is structure is key. Canada needs a formal, permanently mandated mechanism. The second is transparency breeds accountability. Open processes and accessible data are essential. The government can use the national tracking database to facilitate this. Last is partnership is powerful. Meaningful ongoing engagement is vital. We would like to thank our client, Maytree and Alexi, for making this research possible. We would also like to extend our thanks to the individuals and organizations who agreed to participate in our research, also enabling this to be possible. Lastly, we would like to extend our thanks to the GP² faculty team, Krista, Grace, Aaron, and our faculty lead, Matias. Thank you for your ongoing support throughout this entire process.
Thank you all. I think we have Alexi White, our client, over Zoom.
Yeah, thanks. Great presentation, guys, and thank you for all the work you've done on this project over the past year. It's been fantastic, and there's so much here to dig into, and it'll be a big help both to Maytree and directly to the government and all the other folks that you guys have engaged with throughout this process. So well done. My question is around the order of implementation of your recommendations. You've laid out a whole bunch of things from very sort of high level changes that are going to require legislative adjustment, potentially not even just at the federal level, but legislation that could be required at every province and territory as well, down to really specific things around engagement, around data collection and tracking and that kind of stuff. So what is how do you like where do people need to start as we're wrapping our heads around this? Does it need to start from the top and have a tone sort of set from political leadership to get this kind of stuff done, or is this something that you see starting with some of the smaller pieces, some of the things that are already in the works, working through the existing system, and then trying to raise that up to some of the bigger changes that you're recommending?
Thank you for that question, Alexi. We believe that a lot of the infrastructure needed for human rights engagement in Canada already exists. It just needs to be streamlined, coordinated, and optimized for better results. Over the last 5 to 6 years, the Canadian government has taken several steps, like creating the engagement protocol, like assembling the Forum of Ministers on Human Rights, etc. So steps are being taken. Now we need to focus on the outcomes. I think because we are in an election cycle and a lot of our reports outcomes will depend on who is elected. Regardless of that, something that can be improved immediately is how engagement processes work. We know these meetings are being held. We know stakeholders are being engaged. We just need to make this information public. We need to make this information accessible. And I think that's a small step that can be taken within the current framework. And then obviously we move on to the bigger things.
Thank you. Jimmy.
Oh, I would just like to quickly add too, I want to recognize that a lot of the work that civil societies do, Indigenous organizations and all the partners, all these recommendations, it's actually sort of already out there, and a lot of the work that Maytree has done too is around this. And what they found too is that they are fighting an uphill battle against government. And so in thinking about that, thinking about this progress, we're really trying to look at, also talk about advocacy too, right? If the people don't care, the voice is silent, and it's a very isolating experience for all these CSOs who's been fighting these battles for upwards 20 years or even 30 years. So advocacy, getting people educated on human rights issues and getting people active so that we can actually fight for these and pressure government too. So yes.
Now we have our faculty lead, Professor Matias Margulis, ask the second question, please.
Great presentation. I think that you gave us a really good picture of how Canada's kind of muddling through our efforts to report and diffuse, collect and disseminate information. I have maybe two questions. One's a very short one. If you were to put one ministry in charge at the federal level, who would you put in charge?
An existing ministry,
Yeah, which existing ministry?
Canadian Heritage, probably.
You would stick with the status quo?
Yeah, I mean, they've got large resourcing capacity constraints, which with more resources could be helped. But I think ultimately they have the most technical knowledge of all the existing bodies involved in the process right now.
Consensus within the team? Okay. Okay, good. You know, there's a lot of coordination problems as we've been learning in this in particular. My second question is around the engagement. So I think always one of the challenges of opening engagement is that trade-off between efficiency. Who do you include? Who do you exclude? As you mentioned in, was it Serbia? They've only got 18. It's a pretty small number when you think about it. So given that when we talk about Canada's reporting process, NGOs can make parallel reports directly to the UN. They have the ability to participate at the international level. What do you think is what would a reasonable engagement look like, given that in this case, it's not that civil society also has the direct channel through the UN to present at all of the treaty body meetings, et cetera. So how would you see as a reasonable level of engagement as opposed to maybe optimal, given all the constraints and timelines that, things need to get in on time?
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, the scale of operations in Canada is very different from Serbia. The issue concerns are also very different, but something that we noticed and we think could be helpful is thematic engagement, where the government can bring in sort of bigger NGOs or NGOs that have been a part of this process for a very long time to conduct roundtables, etc., with smaller NGOs and then report the findings to the government. An example of this is already happening with women's rights. The Ontario National Women's Association, called ONWA, has been engaging with smaller women's group, and they were able to send a coalition of smaller and bigger women's rights group to the CEDAW committee presentation earlier this year. So if something like that could happen, where the government obviously has capacity constraints and engagement constraints, so if they can devolve this power to some of the leaders in different fields and they can engage smaller organizations, that would be great.
Thank you. I learned that we have time for 2 questions. Yes, David, you first. You raise your hand super fast.
I'll speak into the mic today. So despite the existence of a framework and technological knowledge related to human rights is quite available in Canada, although they do not follow our business pledge, and there are certain problems that we could guess. It could be a lack of staffing, could be lack of funding, or it could just merely be lack of care. And based on your thorough research, what do you think that could elicit the most meaningful change into the Canadian bureaucracy regarding dealing with and keeping track of human rights issues?
I think the number one thing would be implementing a national tracking database. Having a centralized database to facilitate the data, to facilitate with recommendations, tracking just kind of everything across the board for international human rights it'd be helpful to both the bureaucracy, to all the departments involved. It would save time for CSOs who have access to it. It's just that would increase efficiency by a lot.
But I wanted to ask, what certain aspect is blocking them? Is it funding? Is it
I mean, they're getting they're currently piloting.
Do they have not enough people? What do you think is the problem?
I think it's all of those.
It's all of it?
I think it's all of those, but they are making progress. They are piloting the database right now. I mean, to the part about transparency, we don't really know where they're at with the piloting of the database, but there is progress happening.
Any other?
I just want to quickly also add on to that too, to give credit to the officials. They are trying very hard, right? And they're actually very open to talking with us. The problem is the way they say it is that, they can double their budget, they can double their people, and they'll still be knee deep on like all the reporting work. I have to also point out that SDG reporting, it's voluntary. There is no large international requirement for reporting to like all these different treaty bodies and the UPR, and that's a lot of work. So I do want to point that out. That also means, though, that these officials are engaging through focal networks, not like there are some formal tables for like discussing, but it's all like it's all behind like closed doors. Now, if we can create spaces engaging with public the way that SDG sort of the SDG unit under the I think Economic and Social Development Canada did, you know, the way they do it is very public facing. So just adding that.
I love the fact that we have a first-year student asking a question. So, Kaylin, yes, the floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very insightful. You talked about the challenges of the current political climate and also the importance of advocacy. And I was wondering throughout your project if you identified any specific windows of opportunity that partners or different CSOs could engage with meaningfully and partner with different organizations. Thank you.
I mean, the biggest window of opportunity will come post April 28th. And if if the new government follows the same idea of issuing mandate letters, then maybe advocacy can be done around ensuring human rights become a specific part of mandates, like written mandates of different ministries. And obviously, windows of opportunity keep coming up as all of these different treaty body and UPR review cycles keep coming up. So we think that, yeah, like it's an ever-present opportunity for change.
We have one more question, Mari, and then, I mean, if probably. No, you're going to say something, Jimmy. It's okay.
No. Something that Nishtha kind of led on trying to write the report is that Canada is also trying to fight for a seat in the UN Human Rights Committee or Council, right?
Council.
So that is also a place where we can ask Canada to, you know, take responsibility for their own domestic human rights implementation before they go on these multilateral forums to, you know, talk about human rights.
Yeah. Mari?
Yeah, great job, Team Maytree. It was very jarring seeing the opaqueness of the Canadian government's lack of reporting on human rights activities, seeing how there's so much going on in the world related to human rights or the lack of. My question is similar to Kaylin's, but if there's one piece of hope that you got from an interview or something, an anecdote from a stakeholder that really gives you hope going forward, regardless of the outcome of this election, if you just want to share that.
Yeah, I would say that during the interviews with the different stakeholders, I see that the different stakeholders, including governments, civil society, and different stakeholders, they are all like really open to discuss the issues and like have a willingness to work on the issues to become better. So yeah, I think this is I see it as a really a positive step towards like building onto further efforts for the better implementation.
Thank you. I think we're going to give Alexi the opportunity to have the last word about this project and probably some words for the team.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, again, fantastic work. I think this builds on work that's already been started by many academics and civil society leaders over the years. As you've said, people have been working on this for decades, and this is a further contribution, I think, to getting much more detailed, not only about the challenges that are being faced in Canada with the current system, but also really helpful to have international examples that we can pull on. It's especially difficult in the federal system that Canada has to learn from some of these other examples, but knowing that they're out there and being able to now move to making connections with some of these and spreading knowledge of the other ways we could be doing this and doing it better is a huge step forward. So we're looking forward to working with you guys to to publish this work and to get it in front of as many people as we can in the new government, regardless of what happens at the end of the month. So we're optimistic, I think, about what we can do to improve these mechanisms, and through that, hopefully see Canada really move from sort of talking about international human rights to institutionalizing it in a way within government at all levels. So thanks very much. It's great.
Thank you. A round of